Rules are made to be broken, right? When there are no more rules or categorisations, when there are no more niggers or whites, or when there's just people, when there's no more punks, when there's no more dirt, that is when things are going to be okay. And like, we'll probably be dead in like 2 years, me and him.
You must be fucking mad wanting more of us.
Look at that, a living circus. You don't mind I'm being watched by you know.
If you know anything about the Sex Pistols, then you will know, in the history of rock and roll, there is no stranger tale. In over 3 decades, the Pistols have gone from public enemy #1 to national treasures. Without them, popular culture would be very, very different.
No fun!
Slowly but surely, a little scene evolved. I think it was just raw rock and roll.
We was a rock and roll band, albeit with a difference. We was where the action was.
They were dynamic, they were explosive, they were exciting. At times they were crappy, but they were always exciting and they had energy.
Those guys got better and better after each gig. You know, you'd see a great improvement.
They had attitude, a lot of attitude. They were fun. It was just meant to sort of be a breath of fresh air. And that breath of fresh air has continued for like 30-odd years now. It's really weird how the influences have continued, you know?
The music was dismissed as tuneless racket. Punk rock was here.
Inspired by anger and poverty, not art and poetry, the Sex Pistols shocked and scandalised the nation, beleaguered by poverty, unemployment, worker strikes and the death of an empire.
There was always a lot of interest in the Sex Pistols from day one. Basically, I think if they weren't musicians, we would have all been like burglars and thieves and criminals, basically, you know.
They affected everyone who saw them, and whether it was positive or negative, they always provoked a reaction.
The day Johnny Rotten goes back on the words he writes in his songs is the day he dies, and I know that for a fact.
It's a different ball game now. It's all over that. It's all over.
I think they're sickening and disgusting. Their clothes, the way they look, their hair, the way they act.
I think they're wonderful. They're our 1980s, an expression we need. Our first fashion expression for the 80s.
They were great. If I could only make out the words, they'd be greater.
It's like, whoa, there's a band who actually know about the Stooges here.
It was an important time. It was one big family, believe it or not.
There was this shambolic thing where you really didn't know what was going to happen next with the Pistols live, and it was great.
Johnny was just a loudmouth. He just trying to shock people all the time. He's a very smart guy. He knows what he's doing. He's very calculated.
The Johnny Rotten of today. who lives in Marina del Rey, wealthy, well-to-do expatriate living in Los Angeles. Part of the yacht club, I think, you know.
As soon as Sid was in the band, the balance was all gone, because Sid wanted to outdo his mate John. Paul told me that as soon as he joined the band, Sid started calling John a tosser and all that lot, which John weren't happy about.
Sid wasn't a musician. Sid was a tragedy. Sid was a rock star. Sid was punk rock.
The Sex Pistols ignited the punk rock revolution in Britain and created controversies which often eclipsed their music. They became as famous for their outrageous behaviour as their song lyrics. Their 1977 single, God Save the Queen, was regarded as an attack on the British monarchy and British nationalism. The media denounced Johnny Rotten's anti-royal lyrics on their front pages, describing him as the biggest threat to our youth since Hitler.
This was the start of the Pistols as public enemy #1.
The press love to stick you in boxes. They always have and they always will.
There were a few fights and scuffles in the gigs, and then the violence got maybe blown out of proportion. The media had a big hand in blowing up the hype, and I think they wanted a story. They wanted, you know, the dreadful punk rock, you know, phenomenon.
During their 26-month public existence at the top of the music world, the Sex Pistols released just one album and a handful of singles, which arguably remain some of the most definitive releases in modern music. Their music was filled with an anti-establishment sentiment, artistic rage and volatile lyrical content that had never been heard before, and seldom has since. But while they were scaring the British public, Johnny Rotten wrote God Save the Queen, the band's most notorious song, at his parents' breakfast table, awaiting his baked beans.
I don't need a Rolls Royce, I don't need a house in the country, I don't need to live in the south of France. I'm happy as I am, I'm going to carry on. Don't live in Finsbury Park.
Their best played shows drew a couple of hundred people or fewer.
There was 80 people in a hall that held 2,000. The atmosphere at a Pistols gig was general curiosity, hostility, and a few die-hard punks at the front, and quite a few hostile old hippies.
The most famous place, or the most commercial place they played, was in San Francisco, at the Winterland, which became their final date. But that was the highest profile gig that they did. Everything else was very obscure.
For their last gig at the Winterland in San Francisco, they split the $67. They were gone before any of them turned 23. But amidst the chaos that was the Sex Pistols, it's often overlooked just what a great band they are and what great records they made.
And we need more bands like them. We need more aggressive rock bands.
Steve, some nights he'd be right on the button and playing and right in with Paul's drums and stuff like that. And other nights he'd be a shambles, but it was still good. It was an experience each time. The album was just so produced. It didn't sound like Old Man Steptoe singing on top of all these like sort of layers of guitars and stuff, you know.
I just thought they were spellbinding.
Love 'em or hate 'em, it's difficult to deny the influence the Sex Pistols had in changing the face of modern music. They took England and the rest of the world by storm, with raucous, edgy, bare-bones music that challenged the status quo, both politically and musically. Their story is complicated, and not without its casualties.
It was never meant to last too long. The idea was to make one record, last for a couple of years, and if all the band members died, I think, yeah, great.
No one, managed to destroy more with less. Always more of an influence than a musical force, the band that would become the Sex Pistols originated in 1972. Malcolm McLaren had been running a retro clothes shop with his partner, ex-schoolteacher and seamstress, Vivienne Westwood.
A band started to form out of the shop.
I used to hang out with Glenn, Steve and Paul. A couple of times I did a couple of burglaries with Jonesy. You know, we'd break in somewhere, nick a TV set and then sell it for drugs and things like that.
All the gear the Pistols used when they started was as a result of Steve's expeditions. I believe the microphone they used was the same one that Bowie played his last gig as Ziggy Stardust with at Hammersmith Odeon. I think there was a couple of Keith Richards amps in there, and you know, he basically furnished the band with their equipment.
So the music kind of kept us from being sort of hardcore criminals, really, I think, in the end of the day.
Paul was his mate. Paul was like a Shepherd's Bush kid, you know, who happened to be this amazing drummer.
We all used to hang out down Portobello Road on a Saturday and stuff and have a right laugh. I used to see Steve and Paul all the time. They'd be inseparable, like, as a couple. And I used to live down Portobello Road, so like my place used to be open house, you know, for like jamming and whatever, you know.
Paul Cook was like the Charlie Watts of punk. He was an immaculate timekeeper and very powerful, and he was locked with Steve.
Steve was, yeah, he's always been really good. He's always had an attitude, you know, yeah.
Steve Jones was a straight-ahead rock and roll guitar player. He was very Pete Townsend meets Johnny Thunders. Very aggressive.
Disillusioned by the progressive rock and hippie music scene of the time, the fledgling Pistols took their musical inspiration from the 60s mod and rock and roll of The Who and The Small Faces.
It was a direct reaction to people like the Stones and Yes, who were starting to sort of feel threatened.
Originally, punk rock, as I said, it really wasn't punk rock. We were just rock and roll bands.
There's a lot of people who wanted to do a kind of music which wasn't progressive and wasn't glam, wasn't manufactured, and you didn't have to have a music degree to be able to sort of fit into a band. It's just expression, basically. I mean, people call it from the street, but it was like that, really.
Adults didn't really know about it yet, apart from the fact their kids were starting to look a bit weird with these safety pins, and you know, their hippie hairstyles that people had had for years were suddenly being hacked ruthlessly off.
In 1974, bass guitarist Glenn Matlock joined forces with Steve Jones and Paul Cook.
And we played together. We both played with Iggy Pop together, and we sort of cemented a friendship there from the early days. So, yeah, he's the guy I got most in common with. Glenn's always been a wonderful bass player. Maybe a little too tuney, perhaps, for the Pistols, if you like. You know, a bit too much Paul McCartney in there, you know. But he's a songsmith. He's the guy who wrote those riffs.
The epicentre of disaffected London teenage activity was really Malcolm McLaren's sex shop. Glenn Matlock was a kid who was working at the shop, and he played bass, and I think there was one acoustic gig with this lot in a sort of wine bar or something. Steve started trying to sing, and that didn't quite work. They were looking for a singer, and found Johnny Rotten.
The anarchy commenced in 1975 with the arrival of one John Lydon, an individual of the highest order. He was a peculiar and compelling one-man publicity department. Nothing about him was contrived.
Johnny Rotten, excellent frontman and fantastic lyricist, a modern poet. I don't care if he doesn't like me. A lot of respect for his lyrics and what he had to say. You know?
He was a football hooligan, but also a big fan of a wide variety of music. Someone he liked particularly was Alice Cooper.
He looked and sounded like no one else on earth, and due to a childhood bout of meningitis, had developed a stare that would kill.
Johnny just trying to shock people all the time. And he's very, you know, he's got a weird thing about him, but he's really a regular guy.
He's a funny fucker, you know, he's got the turn of phrase, he's great, yeah. I mean, I don't know why he's bothered doing the celebrity shows and all that, but that's up to him. I mean, he's been with the same lady for donkey's years, Nora.
I've never hit it off with John. To this day, we was a sort of acrimonious relationship. When I saw the Pistols at the 100 Club, I met a woman called Nora, who was 18, and I went out with her for about 6 months, and she ended up marrying John years later. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons, you know, I was one of the first guys she went out with on the punk rock scene. Later, I saw him at the Greek Theatre a couple of years ago, and I hadn't seen Nora in like maybe 25 years, and someone sort of tapped her on the shoulder backstage, and, oh, hi, Nora. She turned around, oh, hi, Steve. Hi, I haven't seen you in like, you know, like must be 25 years. She's like, hey, John, look who's here, it's Steve. And like, John just took one look at me and was like, came walking over, and I went, hey, John, hi, do you remember me? And he kind of pushed me and like kind of went, oh, now everybody wants to be my best friend, you know. And I said, hey, John, I didn't say I wanted to be your friend. I said, do you remember me? You know, then he had all his Irish, you know, entourage with him, and it was like fists and like we were going to go for it. And I was like, I don't think so. I was with like one friend, and I said, hey, don't worry, and we walked away.
John kind of, over the years, has developed this Kenneth Williams pantomime dame, but cuttingly vitriolic stand-up comedian persona, and just doing what he likes. I mean, he won't be ordered around by anyone, including me. The other week I saw him at the Mojo Awards, and it was my job to ask him to pose for a photo with Neil Diamond, and he exploded at me. I'm not posing with that orange-tanned bastard and all this sort of stuff. He's still got this spark, but he plays with it now. John's long been aware of his position, power and reputation.
In 1975, Malcolm McLaren persuaded a reluctant John Lydon to audition in his shop.
McLaren liked the way that he looked, and he was looking for a singer for this nascent band that was struggling to get an identity, and said, well, sing along to the jukebox, because there was a big old jukebox in the corner. And he put on Schools Out by Alice Cooper, and suddenly it looked like someone had stuck an electric bolt up his arse, and he sort of started jiggling around and singing Schools Out, wailing, and he said, right, you're in the band.
They'd found the perfect frontman, apart from the fact he couldn't sing. But what did that matter? He had something to say. Lydon was rechristened Johnny Rotten on account of his poor dental health, and the Sex Pistols were born. Despite common perception that punk bands couldn't play their instruments, live performances reveal the Pistols to have been a tight, competent and ferocious live band. Malcolm McLaren became the Sex Pistols' manager and would-be Svengali, plotting their conquest of recession-era Britain using controversy and confrontation.
Malcolm was quite involved with the New York Dolls in '74. Having destroyed them, he returned to London.
He hung around the New York Dolls. He claims he was their manager, but I know the guys from the Dolls. I mean, if you ask David Johansen, he said Malcolm was never our manager. He was our haberdasher.
At first, they were wearing clothes out of Malcolm's shop because they were all very poor and they could get them for nothing, although he probably took it out of their wages or something. Basically, they were a walking advert for Malcolm's shop.
No one could afford to buy Malcolm McLaren's clothes. because even in those days, you know, back in 1976, 77, they cost like 200, 300 quid, whereas the kids could make it themselves out of ripped bin liners and whatever, just expressing themselves. You know.
What's your dress made from? Plastic bin liner. We're so pretty, oh so pretty.
McLaren got the Pistols together to flog his clothes. Basically, he had no idea where it was going to lead to. The talent was Vivian.
You got to give him his credit. I think he helped them. You know, he got them in the rehearsal studio. They wrote the songs, though. I think it might have happened with or without him. I don't think he was responsible for as much as he makes out. He likes to say he's responsible for everything he created. I don't subscribe to that reality.
I hate the guy. I think he's a jerk, big jerk. Yeah, a jerk who got lucky. It's just one of these people. There's always a prat involved somewhere.
How do you react to your group's reputation as being the most revolting in the country?
I find it very amusing.
And yet it's said that you're sick on stage, you spit at the audience and so on. I mean, how can this be a good example to children?
Well, people are sick everywhere. People are sick and fed up of this country, telling them what to do.
But not getting paid for it.
Pardon?
But not getting paid for putting on that sort of public show.
Well, nor are we.
In early 1976, the Pistols began performing at venues like the Marquee Club and the Nashville.
1976, the first half was spent getting better playing gigs, doing places like the Marquee, getting into fights with the audience, because they were getting heckled a lot. I mean, they were unlike anything around. They were opposing everything that had gone before. There were hardly any people at their first gig. If as many people who claimed to have been there had have been, you know, these gigs would have been, you know, double packed.
So the first time I saw the Sex Pistols live was at the Marquee Club when they supported Eddie and the Hot Rods. And so it started out as a little scene, 50 people, 100 people. They did rehearse very hard, they worked very hard. Good musicians, you know.
The Pistols came with that. They had that Chuck Berry element, they had the Kinks, they had the Who, they had Eddie Cochran, they had all those elements they brought into like a garage form. And they related to, they almost were like the Stooges, MC5, and sort of like the New York Dolls.
On 6th of July 1976, newly formed London punk rock act The Damned made their live debut, opening for the Sex Pistols.
We did our first gig at the 100 Club supporting the Pistols. The Pistols kind of had their own fan club, if you like, which was called the Bromley Contingent. And they looked on the Damned as maybe a threat towards the Pistols, I got the feeling. And there's a bunch of kids there which had no allegiance with anyone. It was like the first time we played, and for them kids, probably the first time they'd seen the Pistols. And they really had a good time, and it was really encouraging. We're always grateful for the Pistols, for, or you know, begrudgingly to Malcolm for giving us our first gigs. We were getting paid a £5 for the gig, £5, right, in those days, right, for doing a support gig. But Malcolm, knowing how much we're getting paid, charged us 20 quid for use of PA and lights. That goes to show you how much anarchy there was in Malcolm's heart.
It wasn't long before the Pistols came to the attention of record companies. On October the 8th, 1976, EMI, the largest and most prestigious British record company, signed them for £40,000.
You were just attacking Top of the Pops and the sort of bands that are on there. What do you think they're relevant to the kids 16, 17?
Of course they're not. Relevant to their mums and dads, but that's about all.
What about bands like Rod Stewart?
What about him?
Mums and dads, yeah.
He's all round, isn't he? All round entertainment.
He's an old Don't accept the old order. Get rid of it.
What do you think about bands like the Stones?
I don't. I don't even consider them a band. They're more like a business.
Before, when they had the Stones and the Who and they came along, and they thought they were great because they destroyed everything that went before them. But now they can't take it because we're destroying everything that's gone before us.
The Sex Pistols were such a bolt out of the blue that they would often find themselves in physical danger. But media reports of violence were often exaggerated.
It's not violence, it's just excitement causes it most of the time, you know. When we're playing, people get excited and worked up.
That's because people aren't even used to people standing up and jumping around. They just want them to sit down all the time. And as soon as anything other than that happens, they get really kind of shocked.
It's considered violent. Yeah, it's called. If someone stands up there and goes, yeah, it's... They
go, look, he's starting. Go on, get him out.
The usual.
We got the front page of the Melody Maker, you know, for supposedly having a punch-up when we was actually trying to stop a fight.
I think there was a lot of exaggeration. There were a few fights and scuffles in the gigs, and the violence got maybe blown out of proportion. I think the media had a big hand in blowing up the hype.
It had everything that a tabloid could wish for. Swastikas, unfortunately, came into vogue for about a month early on in the craze, but unfortunately that caught on with the meathead contingent. It became an us against them situation that hasn't been before or since, really.
But don't you get off on causing fights?
Where you heard that from?
Oh, gosh, it's really
rubbish. No, we're nice.
A composition penned by Rotten was set to be their debut single. Anarchy in the UK was released November 26, 1976, much to the bewilderment of the mainstream music press. Johnny Rotten declared himself an antichrist who wanted to destroy everything. The BBC was not amused and gave it no airplay. Anarchy was not even in the charts when the Sex Pistols changed the music scene forever and became household names overnight.
Next question. No. What was the word word? Shit. Was it really? Good heavens.
And then we did the Bill Grundy show, and everything just changed overnight. And everybody then was like in this goldfish bowl.
It took the Bill Grundy show to really catapult punk onto the front page of the tabloids. The Pistols were the last-minute replacements for Queen, who had pulled out of a spot on the Bill Grundy show, and John had been up for 3 days speeding, and they all got further drunk in the green room at the TV company, and they went on, and Bill Grundy basically baited them. Steve Jones was sitting there in a T-shirt with a pair of breasts on it. They called him a dirty fucker. At the time, Bill Grundy was drunk, and he probably thought, this is great TV, I'm getting these yobbos to swear. But in the end, I mean, he got himself the sack, and, you know, it was total outrage.
I remember being told that, yeah, oh, you know, the boys are on TV, on the Grundy show, you know, and tuning in and seeing that and laughing my head off, you know. Then you knew that something was going on.
Unbeknownst to the band, the show was being broadcast live throughout London. The following day, the Pistols were headline news around Britain.
Malcolm initially wasn't very happy about them, but when he saw the headlines the next day, he was very happy about being a kind of art school anarchist like he was.
Anarchy entered the charts at number 43, but record company workers refused to handle it. Members of Parliament denounced the Sex Pistols, and EMI was fast buckling under the public pressure. Punk rock, as it had been christened, had reached the masses.
Do you feel the publicity following the Thames Television interview has been damaging, or do you think it's helped you?
I don't think it's been damaging, far from it. Whether it's helping us is another matter.
In 1976, the Pistols, the Damned and the Clash joined forces and set out on their first major tour of Britain.
The Anarchy Tour was going to be Punk's big tour in the country, spreading the word moment, and it got decimated by the Bill Grundy show.
They got these advances from EMI and CBS and whatever, and they were staying in holiday inns and had a big luxury tour coach and all this sort of stuff. The Damned, we were travelling around in a transit, staying in Mrs. Bunn's guest house, you know what I mean?
As word spread about the group, shows were cancelled and bans implemented. Out of 21 scheduled dates, the Sex Pistols played only 3.
After the Bill Grundy show and after all the front page of the Daily Mirror, you know, TV fury, punk rock filth, cult and all this, half the gigs on the Anarchy Tour got pulled. By the end of that week, I think there's only 4 gigs left.
People are getting very discontented by the fact that kids who have bought and purchased tickets of these venues that are now being cancelled are having to travel further afield to see the band of their choice.
What sort of future do you see a band like the Sex Pistols having? A long future?
I do indeed. I think at least they're standing up and not tolerating any form of censorship in their act.
Would you not agree in any way that the packed halls which you're playing to wherever you can get a concert launched are entirely due to the bad publicity which you've had?
Not at all. Many dates were sold out long before.
The Anarchy Tour, we just followed the length and the breadth of the country by Fleet Street.
The Damned did 1 gig on the Anarchy Tour. You see, McLaren, he needed the Damned, or he needed a band that had been travelling around the country to get basically bums on seats at the gigs, because the other bands hadn't played outside of London. You know, they had this kind of little cult kind of thing going on inside London. And so he needed the Damned. But once he got the Bill Grundy thing, or the feedback from the Bill Grundy thing, he didn't need us no more, because all the country knew about these Sex Pistols, so they're going to go down either to boycott the gig, or they're going to go down and see the bands play. It was kind of weird, because I got the feeling like we did like a line check for the Anarchy, so-called Anarchy Tour, and all of a sudden people weren't really talking to us, and we knew all these people like Mick from the Clash and all this sort of stuff, and Paul and that, and it was like, this is weird, everyone's being really strange, you know. And we found out later that Malcolm McLaren, the Pistols manager, and Bernie Rhodes, the Clash manager, had ordered their boys in their band, like fucking army people, you do not talk, you don't mix with the Damned. And it was like we knew, everybody knew each other. So we got to the first gig, which was like Leeds University. And then Stephen Paul would sneak down and say, we're not meant to talk to you. And we'd have a laugh about it, right? John, and I don't remember seeing Glenn about so much. We didn't see any of the guys from the Clash. They were really sort of like kept under control. You know, talk about complete control. They were controlled by a fucking manager, you know? And yeah. So it was like really sad, which, you know, obviously the Heartbreakers are like looking around thinking, what's going on here? There's this weird politics going on, and they'd be talking to us and talking to the other guys, but never the twain were meant to meet. The Pistols were always like going to be the headliners, then it was going to be the Damned, and then Johnny Thunders, who used to be in the New York Dolls, was going to be third on the bill, and then the Clash, who hadn't hardly played at all. And after the first night, he turned around and said, no, you're going to go on first now. the Clash are going to be second to the bill, and the Thunders is going to be third. And we turned around and said, "Nah, Malcolm, no, fuck you, no way, no way." We was like brought onto this turf for this particular. You needed us, right? And we go down as good as like any of your bands, so. And so no. So I said, "Fuck you." So we fucked off.
Following the end of the tour in December 1976, EMI arranged a series of concerts at the Paradiso in Amsterdam. But before boarding the plane at London Heathrow Airport, the band reportedly spat at each other and verbally abused airport staff. One witness claimed the Sex Pistols were doing something so disgusting that she could not repeat it for publication. It became generally believed Jones had been vomiting on old ladies in the pre-flight lounge. EMI released the Pistols from their contract 2 days later. They were out on the streets again.
The Pistols got chucked off EMI because the board of directors could not cope with having this band, especially when your own pressing plant won't press your records. I mean, what can you do? So they got to pay off, or Malcolm got to pay off.
By now, tensions between Glenn Matlock and Johnny Rotten had reached boiling point. They were the proverbial chalk and cheese. Matlock was steeped in rock and roll tradition, while Rotten clearly wasn't. Glenn officially left by mutual consent in February 1977, with McLaren then claiming he was sacked because he liked the Beatles.
I'd had enough by then, you know. It wasn't going to go... If they didn't recognise my strength in the band, then fuck them.
When we heard the news that Glenn had been given the sack and they got Sid in, it was like, right, that's where Malcolm's going with this. You know, he don't want a band that's going to continue at all, and it didn't.
I think Glenn was really given a raw deal.
When Glenn was kicked out of the band and we saw how much he was upset by that whole thing and the Sid joining the band, I mean, I was around all that. He was really upset. I mean, I saw Glenn in tears. It was really the way they did it. It was, as usual, the way things are done, you know.
Enter rock and roll's ultimate tragedy. Johnny Rotten's childhood friend, John Simon Ritchie, a.k.a. Sid Vicious. Previous drummer of Susie and the Banshees and self-appointed ultimate Sex Pistols fan. What Vicious lacked in musical ability, he'd made up for in sneering attitude.
He was all right, it was just a bit sort of dumb, really. He was easily led, so he was ideal fodder for McLaren to get his grips into, you know.
Sid just didn't have any inborn musical ability. He couldn't really play.
I remember going in the Carsey for a lead, and he was trying to, oh, you know, we're going to have you, you know, you're not in a band anymore. And I said, well, good luck to you. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I've had enough of Rotten, you know, he's hard work. I've done my bit, I've been in the band 3 years, good luck to you. I'll give you some bass lessons if you like. He said, what, you'll give me bass lessons? And I said, yeah. He went, oh, and it was like really, you could see his mind going. I don't think he was quite bright enough to kind of separate fact from fiction.
I think John became very jealous that Sid got a lot of the attention that John, you know, felt was his, you know.
Sid's image fit the band better. His imposing presence, this gangling beanpole in black leather, and his general attitude was more Sex Pistols than Glenn, who was a talented musician who wasn't afraid to acknowledge his respect for Beatles, and, you know, that was it. The whole thing about punk was anyone can do it, and having Sid in the band was definitely a case of anyone can do it, but he looked good. Paul Simonon was in the Clash for exactly the same reason.
In the early days, you know, I'd be walking down the street and I'd see Sid, because we lived around the corner from each other. He'd see me and literally he'd try and kick me in the head or something. You know, I'd move my head away and, and then someone would go, hey, you know, leave him alone, leave him alone, you know.
So he was a big baby in a lot of ways. He wasn't responsible for how he was later on. He was quite a weak individual. I thought he was a very nice bloke.
Sid was a symbol of punk rock. He was everything punk rock, everything that punk rock was good, but it was bad too.
We were all like looking for dope in this kind of very dingy, derelict building. There was an altercation with the people on the ground floor. This guy and his girlfriend. I don't even know what it was about, but Sid picked up a piece of, like a mirror, a square piece of mirror, and he threw it. And this thing just missed this girl's face. I mean, literally would have taken off her face, smashed on the wall behind her. And I was like, wow, you know, I mean, it would have killed her, it would have taken her head off. Then the guy came out and he had a switchblade and stabbed Sid in the leg through the stairs. But there was always that chance that he would go off, and if he went off, there was no kind of calming him down.
He got corrupted from everybody, though, you know?
I think he felt he had to live up to that very sort of public persona of Sid Vicious, you know. John Ritchie was a really nice guy, you know.
On 10th of March 1977, at a press ceremony held outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, the Sex Pistols signed to A&M Records.
The office party to celebrate the signing, which took place outside Buckingham Palace, another McLaren publicity stunt. That ended up with all sorts going on in the toilets. Things got trashed, people throwing up in waste paper bins, secretaries getting molested. They were off that label even quicker.
Under pressure from its own employees, artists and distributors, A&M broke contract with the Pistols.
Ooh, come on, everybody!
6 days later, the band found themselves without a record deal yet again.
What happened with A&M and EMI?
I don't know what happened with EMI, but A&M cancelled our contract because, like, they put us in a limousine and we didn't like it, and me and him beat up the, you know, Paul, our drummer. We got in a fight. We were all like, we'd like drunk like a 2 litre of a bottle that size of 80% proof vodka each, and like a half a bottle of brandy and whiskey and stuff, and like we were a bit out of it, and like we got in a fight in the car, and like we smashed each other's heads in. Steve nearly broke my legs. He twisted my legs around and nearly broke them.
That ain't the real reason they got rid of us.
And then he punched...
That ain't the real reason at all. We don't know the real reason, but I bet they're sorry now, huh?
Yeah.
The next record company headhunt ended with the Pistols signing to Richard Branson's Virgin Records for their third and final record deal in May 1977. Just in time for the Queen's 25th Silver Jubilee. The nation was gripped by royal fever. The Queen was a national treasure. The next single was to be Johnny Rotten's alternative national anthem, God Save the Queen.
God save the Queen!
God Save the Queen was released in May 1977, sending shockwaves up and down Britain. The record was banned from airplay by the BBC, whose Radio 1 dominated music broadcasting.
It said the record was attacking the Queen, you know, but it wasn't. It was more the institution.
The nation was up in arms. Members of Parliament called for the band to be hung at London's Traitors' Gate. Since the Bill Grundy controversy, the band had been public enemy #1. But that all paled into insignificance by the protest that met them after Jubilee week.
A mayhem. It was total hatred from the general public. I watched the Jubilee procession and I was wearing a God Save the Queen t-shirt, and I was threatened, I don't know how many times that day. The powers that be managed to keep God Save the Queen off the #1 spot. Rod Stewart mysteriously appeared when they were reading out the Sunday afternoon Top 20 show on Radio 1. We all thought, oh, it's going to be God Save the Queen, but it wasn't. It was #2.
What musicians do you write? I mean, who do you think is a good singer?
I don't. I don't have any heroes. They're all useless. Well, there's no bands around, is there? None. None that are accessible.
Well, before you...
Unless you pay a £5 to see them, and then you can't see them.
What, when you stood up and started singing the first time, what happened? I mean...
Oh, John, go on.
It was wonderful.
No, come on.
People loved me. They threw flowers.
Well, look, I saw you the 6th time. People were quite shell-shocked.
Well, then you know yourself, don't you?
But what sort of people come to see
people
you?
at home, though, Johnny?
I don't know, just bored people. Bored out their brains with hippies.
What's this thing you got against hippies?
They're complacent.
By 1977, Sid had met Nancy Spungen, a drug addict and occasional prostitute from New York, with a history of severe emotional problems.
She was a bad influence, but at the same time, if Sid was happy, then that's all right, you know.
She was like always whining. She was a whiner. She was a crazy broad from Philadelphia. She just whined. She was like, shut the hell up, man. Where he would act different when she wasn't around. As soon as she came into the picture, he totally started acting different. He became from Sid, the regular guy, to Sid, the asshole.
Nancy was a super groupie, wannabe, junkie slag.
Nancy turned up in London when she did because she had a thing for Jerry Nolan. And the Heartbreakers had just... Jerry Nolan was the drummer in Heartbreakers, and she sort of followed Jerry over under the pretense of having his guitar. Although he's a drummer, he had this really beautiful pink left-handed Fender Esquire with all the knobs on it were offset dice. It was really flash kind of, not very punk, but he couldn't play it, but she brought it over for him. Hey, but he didn't want to, he knew she was bad news and just gave her the bum's rush, and she ended up with Sid. And that's when Sid started going right downhill.
She ruined him. Sid was very gullible, vulnerable, innocent. I mean, he was very innocent before he met her. Never really had a serious girlfriend. She swept him off his feet.
My girlfriend at the time used to make clothes, and she used to kind of hang out there, and Celia was always trying to let her jeans out a bit more because she was putting on weight and putting on weight and putting on weight, and this jeans sort of had these sort of different shade of blue V's in the back. And then I remember going in the kitchen one day and Nancy was there with her hand over a bowl. She'd cut her wrist, eating an ice cream. And I'm going, oh, all right, Nancy, what are you doing? She, oh, Sid doesn't love me anymore. All right, OK, I'll come back, I'm just going to put the kettle on. You know, and it was just total play acting kind of thing.
Well, a lot of people talk about Nancy being this nauseating kind of character, which she could be. But she was very sweet, you know. She came to New York and I was wearing these old shoes with holes in, and she's like, come on, Steve, you know, I'm going to buy you a pair of motorcycle boots. Come on, you know, and we jumped in a cab and she took me up to 48th Street and bought me a pair of motorcycle boots. And she was very generous, and when Sid went on the tour with the Pistols on that tour, you know, we lived around the corner from Nancy. Sid was like, will you look in on Nancy and make sure she's all right, you know. I don't think she had many friends. She was always a sweetheart to me. She was always really nice to me, and she cooked us dinner a couple of times, and, you know, she wasn't the greatest cook in the world, but she wasn't all bad. She wasn't.
October 1977 saw the release of the Sex Pistols' one and only true album. Pre-release orders were so high, it immediately charted at #1.
It was a terrible album, I thought. I really did, because I thought live the Pistols were great. The album was just so produced. It wasn't a punk album as far as I'm concerned, you know.
Further controversy surrounded the band when police took exception to it being displayed in shop windows.
Calling your album Nevermind the Bollocks was obviously another move destined for controversy. I mean, record shops weren't allowed to display it. There was a shop in Nottingham that got prosecuted. The case came up in court and bollocks was proved to be an Old English word in the dictionary.
And that's no indication of what the Pistols were like live at all. That was a real kind of like layers of guitar and real production job. Chris Thomas, Roxy Music producer and Pink Floyd producer, and had nothing to do with punk whatsoever in my book. But the Pistols before that were great.
Never built to last, the Pistols took their publicity circus to America for a bizarrely plotted 7-date tour through the South and Southwest.
They played these very, very obscure places. Texas, rodeo. I mean, you wouldn't put any band in these places, but Malcolm had this idea that he wanted a reaction from rednecks in America. And I see what he was trying to do. It was very dangerous. It was kind of a dangerous sort of ploy for him to do that.
It went badly wrong in America. McLaren, here's another one of his master moves, insisted that they play these redneck bars in the Deep South, which were certainly going to hate them. Why do that when you had New York clamouring to see them and they could have sold out like the Palladium or the Ritz? That was too easy, but ultimately it destroyed the band.
Sid Vicious, by now heavily addicted to heroin, began to live up to his stage name and had descended into the role of a walking emergency.
Sid was the sort of person who'd drink anything or take anything if it was put in front of him.
It didn't help that Sid had a heroin habit and was not really playing. His playing was suffering. He wasn't a great bass player by any stretch of the imagination, but he wasn't really playing at all at this point.
Sid didn't care. He just wanted to get out of it.
Sid was a mess. He was just like Malcolm said, he was a fabulous mess, but he wasn't so fabulous after all.
It's 1978, right?
You got it. It's been that for
It's January. Now, what day is it?
It's the 14th.
But, I mean, what actual day?
Saturday.
Is it?
Yeah, that's a standard tour problem, though. That happens when you're out there.
That happens to me all the time. When I'm at home, I don't even know what day it is.
At the end of the turbulent US tour, the Sex Pistols' crazed juggernaut concluded at the Winterland in San Francisco, where the group finally split on stage.
McLaren destroyed the band in the end because they're playing the redneck bars. The band got really annoyed. Sid was still fighting his addiction. They played that big arena in San Francisco, and that's where John got really fed up. All these arguments, and they just couldn't carry on.
When it finally got to San Francisco Winterland, which was sort of the only real major venue they played on that tour, I think the band were kind of fed up,
That was a terrible gig, and that climax with John, ever got the feeling you've been cheated, his final words on a stage. McLaren definitely went on a complete major ego trip, ultimately working out how he could make tons of money out of this, and no matter what he might say, apart from some ideas about revolution held over from the 60s, he was ultimately making a fortune out of this.
And I think Malcolm really set it up that way. I think he did have a loose script that was based on the band imploding.
Malcolm McLaren had imagined them destroying show business, but show business was all they had.
I can only remember that those kids were believing that they were at the beginning of something, and they believed they had in their reach something authentic, and they were not going to ever let that go. It was a rare jewel, like a ruby in a field of tin.
You split up with the Pistols. How are you occupying your time?
Boringly.
What's stopping you forming another band or doing something?
It's called Malcolm McLaren. As soon as I get him off my back, I'll be able to continue. Until then, I can't release anything without him taking a great big fat share of the profit.
Would you like to start another band?
Yes, I am. I'm rehearsing like all the time with loads of people. And if there's anybody out there who's interested in working with me, that's fine.
So, although you still have a contract with Malcolm, you are trying to get out of it?
Well, he broke it, not me.
What? He threw you out.
Yes, well, he's gone down in press as saying so.
But is it depressing being in a situation where you can't put a record out?
Of course it is. It's the only business I was anything good at.
But do you think Malcolm's trying to avoid you?
Oh, isn't that obvious?
But how can you resolve the situation?
Kill him.
Well, apart from getting a bread knife out, how else can you...
Oh, no, I mean subtly. Car accident and all that. That'd be good fun. Go down well in the papers as well. Real good publicity stunt. Next question.
Do you think that the new wave...
I was always a mug.
Is it a bit hard living up to your image sometimes?
What image? I never thought I had one.
Well, what do you think?
I change from day to day. Well, now we have a following.
Every time you appeared on stage, the music press wrote up precisely what you wore, and they said tonight he came on in an Oliver Twist outfit, or tonight he wore a straw hat.
That's pathetic, isn't it? I mean, like...
Do you think they ever paid enough attention to...
They were more interested in the clothes and the colour of me poxy hair.
What's happened to, not the fans, but the people that, the followers, if you like, all the people that suddenly started making bands? Now the Sex Pistols are split up. What are they doing? They're making their own music?
I have no idea.
I mean, do you see them at all?
There's nowhere to go in London, is there? I mean, like, the problem now is a lot worse than when we started. If anything, we've made it worse.
What?
We're responsible for destroying London.
Do you keep in touch with any of the people that you played with before? Anybody in the band?
No, they never bothered to ring me, so I won't ring them.
After Rotten left the band in January 1978, the remaining trio carried on with vocals by Cook, Jones, Vicious, Edward Tudorpole and Ronnie Biggs, before disbanding in early 1979.
They never got to do a second album, you know, because there was no songs. You know, frigging in the rigging. It's not a song, is it, really?
By the time Steve and Paul were doing the single with Ronnie Biggs, it became a travesty. You could see why McLaren was attracted to getting this great train robber out of hiding, because back then he was a bit of a highwayman legend kind of figure, you know, got away with it, and McLaren's thing was getting away with it. How much can I screw out of EMI? You know, how much can Ronnie Biggs get away with, you know, living the life of luxury in Brazil? You know, put in with the Pistols and, you know, do this, this ludicrous record.
Don't tell me I sold out, pal.
I didn't tell you.
Walked out.
That guy.
It was the only honest band in 2,000 million years. I could not help the management being corrupt. I don't want to talk about the past. I want to go on.
Today, police received an ambulance call at the Chelsea Hotel on West 23rd Street. In room 100, Sid Vicious was sitting on the bed near his picture. In the bathroom was the 20-year-old American girl he'd lived with for 2 years. Nancy Laura Spungen had been stabbed to death. Police say a collapsible hunting knife lay nearby.
Did he say anything to you at that time?
In the course of our investigation, he did make statements to us.
Neon Leon, a rock artist, was with Sid Vicious and Nancy early this morning.
Which I find it kind of hard to believe, knowing him outside of the context of, you know, the image of what the Sex Pistols were supposed to be, anarchy and, you know, destroy
violence
and
and all.
But he really loved this person. He loved her more than he loved his music.
Vicious's real name is John Simon Ritchie, and he's been booked for murder. When they transferred him to a detention center, it took 4 men to hold him. Sid Vicious fought his way through a barricade of cameras. But this time, it wasn't for show.
We were all hanging out. We were at the Chelsea Hotel. I remember running into Sid and Nancy in the hallway, and they were stoned and crazy and acting as stupid as ever, especially Nancy. And I went home. It was like maybe 5 o'clock in the morning or something. I walked home. And a few, like, hours later, I watched TV, I went to sleep. Someone woke me up and said, turned the TV on, and I turned the TV on, and it was the news, and they were arresting Sid for the murder of Nancy. And I thought, oh my God, I was just hanging out with them hours prior. We were just hanging out. We were just there with them. What the hell did he do now? So I got dressed, ran over to the Chelsea Hotel. There's all this chaos and all this craziness, and it was just over the top. And that's when I found out what went down, you know.
After she was murdered, and he went to court. I was there at the courthouse at the arraignment. I went down with Jerry Nolan and my sister to the arraignment, and that's basically where they read the charges out. You know, he was up for the murder, and then he was released on bail, and he came back to my apartment on 3rd Street, and I was alone with him. His mother had come over, but they all went out to get food or whatever. I was alone with Sid, and I asked him, first of all, I asked him, did you kill Nancy? And he told me, no, I didn't do it. Because I felt like I had to, whether he did or not, you know, shit happens. I just wanted to know, did you do it? You know, not to judge him or what, you know. And he flat out told me no, that he didn't do it. All right, good enough for me.
No, I didn't think it was going to end like that, to tell you the truth. I didn't think that Sid was going to be accused of killing Nancy. I mean, I wouldn't have thought that about the guy in a million years. Because he might have, like, sort of done sort of a few nasty, vicious things now and again, but I wouldn't have put him down as a killer at all. No. He loved that girl, you know?
No, I could see them doing something stupid and fighting and maybe breaking up at some point, him beating her up or something crazy. But no way. No way. You know, murder's not even in... Because in our world of rock and roll, that kind of crap happens all the time. Boyfriends and girlfriends fight all the time and break up, and especially if you get crazy rock and roll girlfriends. They get over the top. So we're used to that kind of behavior. And especially people like them that did drugs, they're surrounded in that kind of world, acting crazy, stupid, yelling at each other. But no, murder, never. No ways. I didn't think he had it in him. He just wasn't that kind of guy. He was a really sweet guy deep down. He was a regular guy. He was a sweet guy. It just, she brought all that, and he started to believe the hype. He started to believe, I'm Sid Vicious. I'm the Sex Pistol. I'm a rock star.
I don't think Sid did it. He wouldn't have, no matter how out of it, he never would have killed her. He loved her, for better or worse.
I was interviewed by the police several times, and the knife that was used, there were several prints on the knife. Not just his prints and Nancy's prints, but the prints of this guy called Michael. This young guy who'd been hanging around about 2 weeks before her murder. And I'd never seen him before. And we were quite a tight-knit group anyway, so when this guy started showing up and sitting next to Nancy, I was like, Sidney, you know, who is this guy? And he's like, oh, you know, Nancy really likes him. So that was good enough for me. I was like, oh, okay, you know, I didn't know who he was. But the police said, they were asking me, you know, who's this guy, Michael? Who is it? I said, you know, I don't know much about him, apart from he showed up like 2 weeks before it all went down, then, you know, I never saw him again. They said, well, his prints were on the knife. And in their view, they felt that Sid hadn't done it because he'd been unconscious and on downers and didn't know anything about it. And this guy had murdered her and also robbed them, because they were robbed. They had about $3,000 and a bunch of other things. They were robbed. She was murdered and robbed. And this guy was basically, I think, their #1 suspect. I think the police felt that he didn't do it.
No, I'm not pinning any names, but there was a guy called Neon Leon around who I knew later. You know, there's all sorts of shady characters were there that night.
Subsequent information that's come out since the event that other people have said the same thing. And this character Michael apparently has even confessed to a few people that he did the murder. He'd got out of jail, he'd been on bail twice now, and he came over to an apartment I was staying at, and he was looking to score. He'd been in jail, he was clean, he had no habit, and he'd phoned up, we knew he was coming over, and we had drugs, but we didn't want to sell, we didn't want to give him any because we didn't want to get into trouble again. And so he came over, and the decision was to say that we didn't have anything. And he was like, okay, and I could see his face, he was a little bit despondent. And I felt a little bit bad. We were kind of lying to him, really, but we were trying to keep him out of trouble. Of course, he went away and did it somewhere else and ended up ODing.
What the hell, man? I just thought, what a waste. I just thought, because, you see, I'm so anti-drugs. I've never drank, smoked, or done drugs, but I've been around it all my life. I've been in that world of people getting high doing drugs, and I always thought, this is stupid.
I was devastated. Two of my friends had died in a very short space of time. And it's sad. I'd hate to think that they go down in history, or he goes down in history as having murdered his girlfriend, which he doesn't, you know, he's not guilty in my book.
The tale of the Sex Pistols might have ended there, except for the fact that the group's stature kept growing as the extent of their achievement sunk in.
The main thing about it is you think of the short period of time. I mean, it was a couple of years, you know, all this had happened. And some bands take that long to make an album.
Their instantly recognisable name and the esteem in which they have been held by future musical generations is evidence that they shook up and conquered an industry urgently in need of a facelift.
People know that the Pistols have been reforming for years to play corporate events and getting paid $1 million. They will do that. They did a tour called the Filthy Lucre Tour. This is all a massive finger up at McLaren because they never made any money the first time round out of this Sex Pistols thing, so why shouldn't they now?
Oh, good luck to him. Good luck to him. Not, you know, I don't think John definitely doesn't need the money, but, you know, it's nice for the other guys.
I think it's good they got Glenn Matlock back and they're rocking out. That's a great thing, because they're a great band. And we need more bands like them. Maybe they'll influence another generation of kids.
If you look in the back of any music, you know, wanted section, you know, you'll see they're looking for a guitar player, a singer into the Sex Pistols. You know, yeah, they've left a huge legacy, I think, and quite rightly so.
Punk rock has never gone away since the Sex Pistols threw down the gauntlet. There's been nothing like them, before or since.
At some point, you know.
But that's cool, right? We did a 2-day punk festival at the 100 Club. We were so happy to get a bit of press and getting out and gigging it, you know. What was that noise?
But didn't you had the...
So humid.
It was hot in there.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, let's get in front of the camera. What's wrong with that guy? I can't feel it.